Senator Marco Rubio is on our Newsmaker line. Senator, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I read that yesterday, and I'm glad you're on the program today because I'm with you. And while I'm appreciative of the efforts of the Republicans in the House and the Senate and $4 million for a 2-week continuing resolution and $6 billion for the 3-week extension, it's not enough, Senator. And I'm very concerned right now, especially because of the $105 billion they can defund from Obamacare, that they haven't moved or used this as an opportunity to take that $105 billion back.
Well, I mean, the first thing we have to start is by reminding everybody of why we're doing these, short-term budgets. It's because the Democrats, when they controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, didn't pass a budget, which is really hard to put your arms around. Is there a $1 trillion entity anywhere in human history that, forget about $1 trillion entity, is there any significant entity in human history that hasn't had a budget?
Well, I can answer that question. New York State goes through this every year.
Well, there you go. But I probably don't want to follow that example.
No, you don't.
My point is you have probably the most, the entity that spent most money in all of human history. It's the largest spending entity in the world, a multi-trillion-dollar operation. Doesn't have a budget, so that's why we are where we are at this point. This is the direct result of the failure to do a budget. So that's one thing. And then you add to that the fact that here's the bottom line: is that we borrow $4 billion a day, and everyone's looking at this. The global markets are looking at this. Our enemies are looking at this, and they're saying, the United States, if they continue doing what they're doing now for much longer, there are going to be significant repercussions politically, militarily, economically, socially, governmentally to that country, and they don't have a plan. There's no plan or political will to get out of it, and that's what troubles me the most is, yes, there's room for compromise in politics, but at some point problems have to be solved, and either something solves the problem or it doesn't. And it could be the nicest-looking compromise in the world. If it doesn't solve the problem, why are you doing it? And this debt it's a function of math. It's very simple. The government spends money it doesn't have. And if it keeps doing that at this pace, in short order, we are going to have a very ugly situation on our hands.
Well, I got to tell you something. I'm where you are. Now, look, I said this before the election, and I said this after the election. When I think the Republicans that are elected, I think when they're on the right track, I'm going to support them. If I think they're going off track, I'm going to be a harsh critic. I'm getting very concerned right now, and for this reason. It's commendable. They followed through on their promise. They did vote down Obamacare, and unfortunately the Senate didn't go along with it. It's commendable, $100 billion that they wanted to get rid of, and I think they're going to come pretty close to that number by the end of this. That's commendable. But my problem here is, we discovered very late in the game in that 3,000-page Obamacare bill that, in fact, that the Democrats, very sneaky in their ways, they went ahead and they funded Obamacare with $105 billion. Mm-hmm. Now, they also said their second part of their promise is if they couldn't overturn Obamacare and get the support of the Senate and the White House, that they would defund it. So there's been 123 rescissions in the continuing resolution that came from the House Rules Committee, also run by Republicans. And what it all means is that the same Republican leadership that waived the committee rule to allow House members to vote to cut spending from the previous Congress, they're not doing it here. And I'll tell you what my fear is. I sense that there's a fear that if they shut down the government, they fear they're going to be blamed.
Well, again, look, I don't know.
I know you're a senator.
Going around saying, let's shut down the government per se. I don't want to shut down the government. I want the government to work. I will tell you this. If the government ever shuts down here in the short term, it'll be the fault will be of the people who refused to pass a budget when they were in control of every chamber. That's whose fault it will be. And let me go further and say what we're facing here is the ultimate government shutdown. It's a government that's no longer running not because it doesn't want to run, but because it can't, because no one will lend you money anymore because they don't believe you'll pay them back. And that's what ultimately we're facing with regards to this debt issue. And by the way, the connection that's not made enough these days is the impact this debt has on the fact that jobs aren't being created, the economy is not growing. You can only create jobs by starting new businesses. You can only start new businesses if there's investment money available. Who wants to invest in an economy that they believe is destined for higher taxes? And that's what people around the world world and the financial markets believe, and they believe that for two reasons. One, because the president says that's what it's destined for, and number two, because they see this debt and they think, these guys are going to have to raise taxes to pay this stuff off. And so they're figuring out that maybe they're better off investing that money in other countries, and that's why our economy, one of the reasons our economy is not growing and jobs aren't being created.
As I'm listening to you, Senator, I'm cheering, and this is the thing that perplexes me. I think the reason that we had the most successful midterm of any party in 70 years is because of the very things you're saying now candidates were saying when they were running for office. And that's why I'm with you that I think this boldness is refreshing. I think the voters will support those that are fiscally responsible, those reminding us that we're accumulating $4 billion a day, that we have a $14 trillion debt, that we're robbing our kids' and grandkids' future. I'm just concerned that there might. I know for a fact. Let me just be a little more honest here. I know for a fact that this fear that if there's a government shutdown, that this is going to backfire politically on Republicans, and they're going to get the blame for this. And my attitude is, don't worry about the people that gave you this power, asked you to do this. They will support the people that defend it. And if not, then you know what? Then the country will suffer.
Well, I don't want the government to shut down, and I'll admit politically there's risk in all that. I get all that. Here's what I fear more, though. I fear more the day when my kids are going to turn to me and ask me, hey, weren't you in the Senate when all this bad stuff was happening? How come you got to grow up in the greatest country in the history of the world, and we inherited a declining country? And here's why I really fear it, because it doesn't have to be that way. This decline that people talk about, it is not inevitable. It is a choice, and it's a choice we're being asked to make right now. Sean, I believe with all my heart, I really believe this, that if we make a couple of key and critical choices at this moment in our history, the 21st century will be better for America than the 20th. And that's saying a lot, because the world is coming our way. But we got to be willing to continue to do the things that made America great. And whether it's foreign policy, fiscal policy, on issue after issue, this administration is making decisions that I believe will rob us of everything that makes us the greatest society in all of human history. That's why I ran for the Senate. And that's why, I don't know how long I'll be able to be here. I mean, I plan to be here 6 years, and maybe more of the voters of Florida will allow me to do that. And if we want to do that. But in the time that I am here, I'm going to try to be a voice for those things and try to be as effective as I can. And what I'm inspired by is that I think a growing and significant number of our colleagues share that view.
It's interesting as I listen to you. I was interviewed for about 2.5 hours. I'm going to be in the cover of Newsmax. I think it's the June edition. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how you're going to react to this, but I predicted in this piece, I said that you will be president one day. And it's for the very passion and the common sense conservatism that you just expressed.
Well, I take that as a compliment on your part. On the other hand,
you don't want to associate with me. That's only going to hurt your chances.
No, listen, I find that to be a compliment. I'll make sure my wife doesn't read that month's edition of Newsmax. But I will say this, look, the Senate is an important place where good stuff can happen on behalf of our country. It has in the past. It can again. It's a good platform to have this conversation. But what I really hope for at the end of the day is that we can get enough people, I don't care what party they're a member of, in the House and in the Senate, to realize, look, this time it's different. The issues we're facing are real, and we have a choice here. And a world where America continues to abdicate global leadership to the United Nations or things of that nature is not a better world. It is not. And if you don't believe me, just look at Libya. And I'm not if you don't believe me, but if folks don't believe me, just look at Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi is on the verge of carrying out a bloodbath. I mean, he's on the verge of recapturing momentum in that country, and the consequences to that are going to be horrific. And the world is scratching their head in puzzlement how the United States stands by and watches under this president. Well, France, of all places, and England are leading the charge and calling for things like that no-fly zone. So, the United States has to lead as well on foreign policy. The world expects it. The world is a better place when America is the strongest and most powerful country in the world.
Well, it brings us to the crisis of 2012 and the election, and I think the importance, the defining presidential election of our lifetime is coming up here. You mentioned the debt. You mentioned Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. How do we get those items, again, moving towards non-discretionary?
But here's the simplest way to prove it. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Social Security and Medicare cannot and should not change for people like my mom who are retired and in the program. But Medicare and Social Security are going to have to look very different for people like me who are 40 years old if I even want it to exist. If I want Social Security and Medicare to exist, much less live in the America that I grew up in and have my children inherit that, then that program's going to have to look different. We're going to, I think people of my generation are willing to do that. I don't want my mom to have benefits to be reduced, but which, by the way, is what's going to happen if we do nothing. That's the thing nobody's saying. If we do nothing to Social Security and Medicare, we leave it the way it is, we are guaranteeing benefit reductions. I want to save those programs, and I want to save them in a way that my parent, my mom, and her generation are not impacted, but also with a mature realization that my generation, I'm 40, so I'm decades away from retirement, that my Medicare and my Social Security is going to have to look different, and that's fine. That's okay. I've got time to plan for that. I think people of my generation are willing to accept that. They're asking for that kind of leadership, and all we need to do is have people here in Washington that have the same vision that our people do. One thing we should always remind ourselves of, Sean, is that there's nothing wrong with Americans or America. It's government that's broken. America's not broken. The government is broken. Our people are as great as they have ever been. What they need now are leaders and a government worthy of our people.
I fully understand. I'm 49 years old. I know I look a lot younger than that, Senator.
You do. I thought you were in your 30s.
But now you sound like a politician. You were great up until that comment. But I've worked my whole life, and I don't expect I'm going to see a penny of Social Security. I don't expect.
I mean, the program can easily be saved with some reforms, and we know that.
Yeah, but it's going to be
politics.
It's going to be means
play politics with it.
Yeah, but it's going to be means testing, number one, and it's going to be number two. They're going to raise the retirement age probably till about a day before I die.
Well, actually, Paul Ryan's plans, if you look at it, and that's one approach that I think is really what it would mean that I would get to retire. I think it's 10 months later than my dad did. I mean, that's not bad. It's just, I think people know this. Here's the reality of some of those issues, and that is that they make very powerful politics, and people would much rather play politics with it than they would, try to solve it, because it's a powerful tool every 2 years in their electoral arsenal. And look, the reality of it is we do have people in American politics that are willing to win their next election, even if it means losing the essence of their country.
Let me ask you, I know you just started out as a senator, and we're about to hit this presidential cycle here, and I know a lot of people have encouraged you to get into this. What is your reaction to that?
I'm flattered. I think people mean that as a compliment for the most part. But what I've learned in my limited time in politics is, that if you focus on anything other than the job you have, you're not going to do it well. And what I know about Washington, the little bit I know about it, is that, today's flavor of the month is tomorrow's, they ignore you, and there's a lot of ups and downs in this. Tomorrow they'll talk about somebody else like that. The best thing I can do with the people of Florida deserve is to have a senator that, number one, is doing the things they campaigned on. I campaigned on a set of ideas and principles, and I want to be a voice for that. I want to be an effective voice for those things, and that's what people from Florida, expect and deserve, and that's what I have to focus on. If I let any of that other stuff affect me or get in my head, then, I won't be able to do that job well. Your heart's got to be in it 100%, or you're not going to do it right.
So that really means you're taking yourself out of any chance of getting in this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I'm focused on this job. Absolutely. I've got to focus on this job. This job I have, I've been here 10 weeks. I'm not exactly an expert at how the Senate works or how to be effective at it.
Yeah, but you actually, have a better track record than Barack Obama. Remember, he voted president and switched his vote a zillion times. Let me give you one scenario, and I know you're going to hate me for this, and I hope you'll forgive me in advance, but this is part of my job, and I hope you understand. What if, you stay out of it, and somebody emerges as the candidate, and they knock on your door, and they say, I really want you to be America's vice president. Would you consider that?
No, I don't think so. I think I'd prefer to serve in the U.S. Senate and do the job I did here. I told people I was running for the U.S. Senate. I was going to come up here and be their voice.
All right, don't say definitively no, because I want you to leave that door open.
No, I just don't. No. First of all, I don't think that's going to happen. And second of all, it's not something I'd be interested in. Certainly not interested in it now. I'm really focused on doing it. We need.
Listen, I want to move to Florida and save all this money in New York taxes. I want you to be my senator.
You're there a lot. You're just all you got to do is a couple months longer, and you can avoid the. Although I heard yesterday judges in New York are now defining if you have any kind of functional home in New York, that's a full-time resident, and they tax you for it. So
can you believe it?
Yeah, Mayor Bloomberg told me that, actually. I'm shocked.
Yeah, it is shocking. I guess if you're here one day as like an athlete, you got to pay taxes for that day.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. All right, well, listen, Senator, I honestly appreciate your conservative strength, values, principles, and I can tell you, just listening to you, in the 10 weeks you've been there, you've not been corrupted at all, and I really admire your stand on this, and I support you 100%. Thank you for being with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.